The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts were only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I created, people together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord, and these are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh. For the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I am going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. And this is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its width, 50 cubits, and its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above. And put the door of the ark on its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For my part, I am going to bring a flood of waters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing on the ground according to its kind. 2 of every kind shall come in to you to keep them alive. Also, take with you every kind of food that is eaten, store it up, and it shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of clean animals, the male and its mate, and a pair of animals that are not clean, the male and its mate. 7 pairs of the birds of the air, also male and female, to keep their kind alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came on the earth, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. This is the word of the Lord. It is an interesting reality to think about the Bible and to think about how it is that we read the Bible. Particularly as a worship leader, it's impressed upon me frequently how different a reading is depending on where you start and where you stop. So here we have stopped with the waters of the flood, and that creates a very different reading in some ways than if we keep going until the rainbow. But I want to stay with the floodwaters for a minute. These waters that prefigure the baptism, the sacrament that we appreciate and value in this church today. And I want to suggest that there are two main ways to read this passage. There are a million ways to read this passage, but they fall into two main categories. One of them is to read the passage in terms of the historical occurrence of the flood, as something that happened, of the act of God and of the behavior of Noah. You know, throughout every culture of the world, from ancient times, there are these stories of world-ending floods survived by one person or one family. And that suggests that happened at some time, that cultures, all of whom are descended from the same root, are remembering some kind of prehistoric event. Now, mind what I mean by prehistory here, because we sometimes say prehistoric to mean old, but the science of history is a modern science of determining what occurred by critical analysis of primary source documents, of texts. Prehistory is a different discipline altogether. It's just as legitimate, it's a scientific discipline, but you don't have texts. It's the study of the world before history got written down, or certainly before any surviving texts from that period remain. And so in prehistory, you don't have texts, you have artifacts, and you have hints. And these myths from thousands of years later indicate that something prehistoric happened thousands of years earlier. So then, what was that like? What was that event like? If you could be there in the room, or it wasn't a room, in Noah's backyard, when God said it's going to rain. And as a Christian, if you believe the Bible, and you believe that this flood story is the most accurate of all the flood stories, as you should, then what does that mean? It leads to all sorts of interesting questions. Questions like, how did Noah fit all the animals onto the ark? There are lots of kinds of animals. And how did he get the kangaroos? He had to get them from Australia and to Australia afterwards from Mount Ararat in Turkey. And I don't see any kangaroo footprints. How did they get to the... And by the way, was there an Arctic enclosure on the ark? I mean, what about the animals that need to live in the snow? Also, why didn't Noah swat those mosquitoes? That would have been better. What did it smell like in there? And then, if and when we're ever satisfied with the answers to those questions, or we decide to put them to rest, this kind of reading leads to deeper questions. At least questions that are, in my opinion, deeper. Questions like, did God just commit mass genocide? And am I okay with that? As Floridians, you have seen floods. You know what floods look like. They're not just clean and wash away the bad stuff. Afterwards, there's a smell. There's a wreckage. There's garbage everywhere. Is God the author of that kind of death? Noah, it says in the text, is righteous. If we're talking about the historical occurrence of the flood, what's righteous about him? What did he really do right except save his own hide? And him and his, right? If Noah's going to be righteous, I expect Oskar Schindler. The Holocaust is coming, the annihilation. Sneak as many people into that ark as you can. We don't see any indication of that in Noah. And what's the psychological toll of a person shut up inside an ark for 40 days and 40 nights? And outside he hears rain and death, and then comes out on a new world. How's that feel? It causes us to go to a very deep place, a very good place, but a very difficult one. And so that's a good reading if it can bring us there. Where it eventually leads us is to ask the question, does God make mistakes? God says in the text that he wants a flood because he's grieved that he made humanity. He regrets it. Does God regret things that God did? After the flood, he says, I'm never going to do that again. Does God regret things that God did? It's a useful reading, and it's one that I might return to at some time. But it's a reading for another time. Because right now, we are in Mythic Genesis, and we are walking through the main themes of Genesis 1 through 11. And so, instead, in order to pay attention to what comes before and what comes after it and the type of literature that we're reading, I want to invite us not to look beyond the text, but to look inside the text. And to study not the historical occurrence of the flood and what that hypothetically might have been like, but instead the story that we have. Because after all, those questions that we ask, those questions about the psychology of Noah and the attitude of God and the mosquitoes, those are all questions about things that are not written down, right? Those are all hypothetical questions about things that the text doesn't say. And there's a value to saying, well, let's talk about what the text does say. Once again, every culture of the world seems to have a flood story. And that implies that a flood happened, but it also implies that that's a genre of literature. And it's a genre of literature that this story is contributing towards. So what do we end up with if we pay attention to the words in this document, the order of them, the ways they make us feel, the things they make us think, and study just what's written? God says in this story that he saw the wickedness of humankind was great on the earth, and that every inclination of their hearts were only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. Forget about what that about the action of God doing that, and just pay attention to that feeling inside you. Do you feel that? Does that resonate with you? I think it should. I think it's supposed to. When we pray for Daniel, who was needlessly killed at a killing in Lake Mary, it's like the third shooting this year in Florida. And you just look at the lullabies on the news and the stories in our friends' life, good people that are getting sick and that are suffering, and you just want to say, enough. I can't take it anymore. If the world is no darn good, then can we be done? When is it going to be over, Lord? You ever feel this way? You ever feel that way about yourself? I'm no darn good. I'm sorry I was ever born, right? Isn't that what the phrase is? I'm sorry I was ever born. I'm sorry I created the world. In Genesis, God has just endured the first human beings ever created failing, doing the one thing they could possibly have done wrong. And then in the fallen world, in the world that he sent them out of Eden to protect Eden, they invent a worse sin. One of the worst sins ever: murder, fratricide, Cain and Abel. And now, a chapter later, God is just done with it. Everyone is bad. There's nothing good. I'm just gonna get rid of it. Gonna wipe it clean. I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air. I'm sorry I made them. When I heard about the shooting, I got a text from Jenny. I was watching Mr. Rogers. The Enzian Theater has a Won't You Be My Neighbor production. And so I'm sitting there hearing about this, oh my gosh, I hadn't even heard this happened. And Mr. Rogers is talking to me, saying, what do you do with the mad that you feel? When you feel so mad you could bite? When the whole wide world seems oh so wrong, and nothing you do seems very right. What do you do? Do you punch a bag? Do you pound some clay or some dough? Do you round up friends for a game of tag and see how fast you'll go? It's great to be able to stop when you've planned to do something that's wrong, and be able to do something else instead, and to think this song: I can stop when I want to. I can stop when I wish. I can stop anytime. And what a good feeling to feel like this and know that that feeling is really mine. The contradictions, the contrasts of wanting one thing, wanting something destructive, and wanting more deeply something redemptive. We see that in this text. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. Sometimes the story of Genesis, it feels a bit like developing photos in a darkroom. You know, you go into the room and you have a blank sheet of paper, but it's not blank. And you dip it in the fluids and you hang it up and something appears. And in this passage, with God's selection of Noah, I think we're beginning to develop this trend of God picking favorites. And the way it develops, it appears clearly to us in this text, but you realize it's been there since the very beginning. Humans were the favorite animal that God made. And then God liked Abel's sacrifice better than Cain's. And then God chose Noah. Noah became the first chosen person, and that's going to prefigure Abraham and Moses and Jesus. God takes one and uses them to change something. Of course, the difference is that the Jesus story is the exact opposite of this. Noah, alone in his generation, was righteous, which there are two ways to read that. You could read that either as Noah was the only one who was a pretty decent person that we would all consider pretty decent, or within this generation that was so terrible, Noah was the only one that had like anything redeemable about him. But either way, Noah's the best person alive at his time. And so everyone else has to be killed, has to be slaughtered. Jesus is the best person alive in his time, the only person righteous. And so everyone else has to be saved. Jesus gets slaughtered. But if I close this up and I worry too much about the events, about the occurrences, then I can't see that. I can't appreciate that. I end up having to defend God. Having to say, oh, no. God executed righteous judgment. It's okay that he should, he created people. He can decide when they die. There's no problem here. And I can't let myself see what the text is doing to me because I'm worried that it would have theological implications, that it would be blasphemy even. But if I let go, and I say, oh, well, let's just look at what happens in the story, then I start to see that the contrast is a beautiful part of it. There's truth to the fact that this flood response seems almost immature of God. It seems like he's saying, I'm going to take my ball and go home. Right? And that God matures over the course of the text. I mean, the character arc is all on God's side. Noah doesn't change, at least not for the better. He gets off the ark and decides to get drunk. But God says, ooh, I'm going to start picking people and making covenants. God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm going to destroy them. That's ironic, y'all. Amen? Do you see the irony there? There's too much violence, so I'm going to do a genocide? I'm going to kill everyone. And that's not an accident in the text. The text wants us to realize that. The author didn't write that down not realizing that he just put the word destroy next to the word violence. Right? Those two words are there for you to notice them. This is surprising. And by the way, this flood thing, it doesn't work. But that's not a flaw in the text. That's not a problem with the Bible. That's not something that we have to explain away. That's the point of the text. God is deeply grieved with sin and unrighteousness and suffering in the world. It bothers him. All of the feelings that you feel when you see instances of unrighteousness, God feels those and more. And in some ways, he feels personally responsible for them because he made us and he is serious about getting rid of those problems. He's willing to try anything. And it turns out that the first thing that you try doesn't always work. The problem of sin is pernicious. It's not gonna get fixed so easily. We need different solutions because we've tried all of the obvious stuff. And the most obvious thing when you have just a widespread problem in a system is what? You got to hit reset. I have a clip for you. I've been kind of heavy and I want to lighten the mood. Let's show a clip from one of my favorite British TV series about my old occupation.
Hello, IT? Have you tried turning it off and on again? Oh, okay, well, the button on the side, is it glowing? Yeah, you need to turn it on. The button turns it on? Yeah. You do know how a button works, don't you? No, not on clothes.
Hello, IT? Yeah. Have you tried forcing an unexpected reboot?
No, there you go. No, there you go. I just heard it come on. No, that's the music you hear when it comes on. No, that's the music you hear when... I'm sorry, are you from the past?
You see, the driver hooks a function by patching the system call table, so it's not safe to unload it unless another thread's about to jump in there and do its stuff, and you don't want to end up in the middle of invalid memory. Hello?
Oh, really? Well, why don't you come down here and make me then?
That's a show by the name of IT Crowd, and they establish that in the first episode, and it just becomes their greeting. So anytime they answer the phone, it's, "Hello, IT, have you tried turning it off and on again?" Because that's what you do. I mean, that whole show is embarrassingly true to life as a technical support person. That is so close to what it's like. But the first thing that you've got to do when you've got any kind of problem is, let's try a clean reboot. Let's wipe it clean. Let's start again. I've heard people, we've now been pretty settled as the millennials. People call my generation the millennials. For a while, we were still toying with names, and they were thinking of calling us the reset generation, because we were the generation that was raised with electronics and systems for whom pushing reset was always an option. You know, we weren't writing in pen. We were typing onto a computer and had always an ability to press reset. And that's always the first step. And if that doesn't work in IT, that's when you start troubleshooting. That's when you start the real work of fixing it. Because it turns out this isn't the simple problem. Human sinfulness couldn't have been fixed if just God created the world again, but better. He tried that. So God starts troubleshooting. "I will establish my covenant with you, Noah, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wives, and your sons' wives with you, and every living thing of all flesh." You see, this is not a story about God killing almost all of humanity in a terrible way. It's not a story about that. It is true that that's in the story. That you could look at that's one thing that takes place inside the story. But this is a story about God sparing one family and leaving enough animals to start over again. This is a story about God's emotional, real, relatable, visceral reaction to the face of unrighteousness, feeling the mad that God feels, and yet in the midst of that responding with mercy and with ordination, with choosing someone to do better. It's the beginning of a grace-filled global restoration. And then the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation." And Noah, with his sons and with his wife's sons, went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Sin is serious. It is deathly, murderously serious. It's serious as cancer. But grace is serious too. And chosen people like you and like Mr. Rogers are involved in God's plan to fix the world. I was in preschool when I first got my first taste of Presbyterian liturgy. I was an evangelical kid and wouldn't have noticed Presbyterian liturgy if it bit me on the nose in a Sunday service, but I did watch Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers was an ordained minister, and he began every neighborhood by singing an opening hymn, "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" with that invocation, with an invitation to be there with him. And he ended every program with a closing hymn, "It's Such a Good Feeling," and with a benediction at the end of the closing hymn that is appropriate as we leave worship today in recognition of the fact that God is not a God who destroys us. God is a God who will redeem us. And we don't have to worry about where we're going. The benediction, which I'm sure you'll find familiar. It's such a good feeling. A feeling to know that I'll be back when the week is new. And I'll have more ideas for you. And you'll have things you'll want to talk about. I will too.